I'm Tony Scott with bnetTV. We are here at the Small Cell Global Congress in Berlin. I'm speaking with Mr. Simon Saunders from the Small Cell Forum. How are you today, sir?
I'm really well, Tony. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Likewise, it's been several years that I've been updating bnetTV on the progress of small cells within the Small Cell Forum, so it's great to bring the story up to date.
It's fantastic that the small cells have come so far so fast, and the evolution of it now into the enterprise and the scale at which we're talking about at this conference is pretty impressive, and it's pretty exciting. Can you tell me a little bit about the back history of it, the backstory, and then how we got to today?
Yeah, I'd be really pleased to. So I've had the opportunity to help in this industry since we founded what was then the Femto Forum back in actually early 2007, so more than 5 years ago. And through that period of time, we've seen a number of evolutions. I mean, essentially our mission back then was to get femto cells off the ground, because back then there were no femto cells deployed commercially, and to identify and work through any barriers to their widespread commercial deployment. And I'd have to say, job done. You know, over that period of time, we addressed issues of technology, of interference and spectrum management. We addressed issues of standards, making sure that there was interoperability across the industry. We addressed issues of business case, helping people identify the key levers in the business case and the opportunities for femto cells to really help to deploy mobile broadband better, faster, more cost effectively, and with new service possibilities. And a whole range of other initiatives that we worked through. The fact that we went from 0 femto cells back then to a point where today there's 45 commercial operators, individual operators with deployments topping 1 million femto cells each, femto cells deployed across 3 continents, femto cells being used increasingly to drive not only getting some coverage into homes, but really driving a better mobile broadband experience, you know, is testament to the work that lots of people have done within our industry forum. But actually, I'd have to say, if we'd just stayed focused only on femto cells, we could have said possibly, you know, in the course of the last few months that at a certain level, job done. The forum had served its purpose, and the industry had assimilated femto cells sufficiently to get on with that through normal processes. But it turns out there's a much wider mission now. And we're working across all those environments you talk about at taking that femto technology that has been well proven now as scalable and cost effective, and bringing that into the wider range of small cells, be it picocells, microcells, metrocells, meadow cells, call them what you will. They all share that common ancestry. They're all kind of different species of that umbrella term of small cells. So on the back of that, early this year, we rebranded our forum as the Small Cell Forum. We expanded the mission to include all those technologies and Wi-Fi besides, to bring that into the ecosystem. And we expanded the extent to which we were really drawing on operator needs and reflecting those needs. So bringing us bang up to date, my personal role as the chairman of Small Cell Forum actually finished at the end of September. I've been able to hand on to a fantastic team of Gordon Mansfield from AT&T, who's now the Small Cell Forum's global chairman. We have regional vice chairs in Dr. Alan Law from Vodafone, representing the whole of European operator interests, of Shimazaki-san from SoftBank, representing Asian operator interests. We have a new full-time chief executive called Graham Wright, who's an industry veteran with a great technology and marketing background to actually drive the day-to-day operations of the forum and support the members. And I feel I'm, you know, handing on that baton with the forum in absolutely great shape and a whole new set of challenges as we apply that technology to these different environments over the years. So I'm looking forward to watching the forum do that in another context, and to supporting people in their real-world deployments of small cells in various contexts.
You're extremely versed in this ecosystem. You've been doing it for quite a long time. You've shaped a fantastic organization, great standards and practices. I like to talk about that a lot because, you know, those are things that all forums in their infancy try to get grounded with. That's happened, and now this forward momentum on getting small cells, which sort of have have this wide range of products that are involved with that, into a scalable situation for enterprise is going to require further case study standards and help within the ecosystem. That all being said, you made a really great cookie cutter type situation for the members to be able to follow. What are some of the things that are being talked about at this particular forum that sort of work into that cookie cutter type model?
Yeah, really good question. So then there's if you like kind of two tracks when we think about any of the sort of new application areas. One is the fundamental technology. Does the technology work, and can it be put forward in a way that encourages a mass ecosystem to get the economics right? And in that sort of part of the cookie cutter, the emphasis has been on us understanding first and foremost the operator requirements. So with femtocells back in 2008, we gathered those operator requirements on the basis that it wasn't an individual operator, this was the industry speaking. If you want this industry to be successful, these are the things you need to do. And we work to facilitate the consensus amongst members as to how that should be done with architectures, interfaces, techniques, getting the right balance between standardizing everything, but also leaving room for innovation amongst the players, so it stays a vibrant and interesting market. And then bringing that kind of consensus into the standards bodies. So we did all that with femtocells. The same thing is now beginning to happen with the wider small cells, the outdoor public access metro cell type environments. And the forum has an active process right now to gather those operator requirements. So even as operators are proceeding with their trials, to make sure it's a scalable ecosystem into the future, we're working with the standards bodies and with our members to make sure that this open, interoperable principle that's been there since the beginning is maintained. Now, I actually think for the wider small cells, that's a vital track, very important and challenging one, but it's actually not the dominant challenge. It's necessary, but I have confidence that the technologists will get to grips with all of that. What we're really seeing is that there's a broader set of kind of business, real-world commercial challenges around getting small cells out there, which are in common. Where is the backhaul? Where is the street furniture that we can deploy best? Where would we like to deploy best? Is it in the middle of a hotspot? Is it at the edges of the macro cell? Is it closest to the locations of the backhaul, or some permutation of that? So in the kind of radio planning world that we thought we understood really well, and we wrote the rule book for that. The industry wrote the rule book back in the early to mid 90s, for macro cells. We have to rip that up, actually. The macro cells are still there. That's a good, valid starting point. But these questions of where, how, and how many are completely open at this stage. Every operator now tells me they need small cells, but exactly how many and for precisely what purpose is really very variable. So there's a big project there. And it also comes down to very brass tacks, real-world issues like how much space is there on a lamppost? What shape should the small cell be to satisfy the planning regulations? And the regulators, the local government, even the national government now have a role to play in recognising that in delivering on their kind of broadband aspirations to the benefit of society, small cells have a role, and they have a role in encouraging small cells. So it's not just operators going and knocking on the door and saying, can I use your street lamp for putting a piece of technology there? It's actually the industry engaging and saying, look at the benefits that comes from this in driving broadband adoption and economic benefits that come out of that for doing business, for innovating, for making the society a better environment, for dealing with local government. And then the question of getting access to the lamppost should just pull into that very naturally. It's a big project. There's a lot to do.
That is a big project, and you bring up a really good point. Are we going to see somewhere in the future lampposts having 10 different carrier small cells on them, or is this something that carriers are going to share? Or putting them in furniture is one thing, great, that works, but it's how many. Are we going to make furniture out of small cells at this point? Because if you've got 5 carriers, you see where I'm going with that.
I totally see where you're going with it. And we've got quite a conundrum, actually, which on the one hand, in a world where macro cell networks are well established and operators have comparable numbers, let's say, of macro cells, and often in some territories are sharing those anyway, there's an argument that the network level differentiation is not as big as it once was, but actually small cells create a new bastion of opportunity for operators to be differentiated. Flip side is, as you've indicated, there's only so many street lamps down a street, and once a good one has been used by one operator, should that really cauterize that environment for everybody else? So on the one hand, we look for the sharing of assets, of the backhaul, of the general environment, but still allowing operators to paint different pictures. So that there is potential for small cells to incorporate the kind of RAN sharing and even core network sharing amongst operators that is already quite well established in some macrocell networks. But on the other hand, even if they don't, even if it's one operator small cell on a given lamppost, you can interlace them down a street while still sharing the essential components of the backhaul and the permissions with the city and so on. And we're seeing wholesale hosted managed models, small cells as a service, if you will, which could help to facilitate some of that and kind of deal with the complexity at the street level and present to operators a palette of, here are some sites pre-qualified with the right sort of backhaul. You can choose from amongst these. And I actually think that isn't simply about serving a fixed level of demand that operators have. It can actually facilitate operators to go further and deploy more small cells than they would do otherwise.
It seems like a better use of CapEx for an operator to farm that out, to outsource that, if you will, to maybe different companies, because whether a subscribership is malleable in an area, and you've got to turn up the juice or turn down the juice, there's an expenditure there and a management issue and that sort of goes on and on. So is this idea of outsourcing to companies the managed small cell, is that a viable business model? Is it going to reduce the overall cost structures to the carrier? And then where I'm sort of leading to is that going to get to deployment at scale at a faster rate?
So first of all, we shouldn't imagine that the idea of hosted managed networks outsourced is new in the mobile industry. Carriers often buy their backhaul and their transport network from others as a managed service. They often rent the sites from others as a managed service. For many operators, they've actually offloaded all of their network assets to other holding companies, and that's managed separately. So in some ways, it's just continuing that kind of trend for pooling assets where it makes sense, but retaining the opportunity to differentiate where they can do that. So I think it does make sense there. But I do think it's somewhat distinct in small cells, because when you increase the number of nodes in your network, by which I mean base stations in this case, by a factor of 10 or 100, that's a different way of thinking. That's a different level of complexity. And in some ways, in some environments, actually mobile operators are not that used to that. And others might be, but people that are running street cabinets on the street that are for broadband on every street corner, maybe they're quite well placed to help with that process. Likewise, if you're talking about the actual in-building side of things with femtocells, picocells, well, the people that are used to doing services in those buildings, including in the enterprise system integrators, have a role to play. So I think, smart operators will look to do their own thing where it makes sense to really differentiate, but they'll also look to draw on the skills and the assets of others wherever they can in smart ways. And though we're at, in many ways, the very early stages of that sort of public access deployment, when we look to the longer term and the scope for really mass deployments, there are some smart folks now trying to make sure that they secure the relationships and even the rights today to set the scene for their mass deployments in the future. So it's pretty exciting.
From a geography standpoint, globally, are we going to see deployment in new developing countries, or other rural areas in certain continents faster than we'll see them in others?
Really interesting. I think what we'll see is a very different style and set of drivers for deployments. We'll see deployments everywhere. Indeed, we are seeing deployments everywhere. But for example, in North America, I can see an emerging landscape where operators are actually ready to talk about we're deploying a lot of small cells, and that makes us better than somebody else that isn't deploying lots of small cells, so it gets quite visible. In other places, it's very much behind the scenes in the network. There's deployments happening right now that don't get announced because they're just part of the network, and they're just keeping the service good for users by, you know, offloading traffic where it makes sense to do so and picking up the strain in those busy areas. So there are a lot of things that you might call a trial, but they're carrying real live service today in some environments, like in Europe. In developing markets, we're seeing a lot of interest in deploying small cells to bring a service to a place that just wouldn't have been economical to bring it anyway. And in some cases, that's bringing 4G there, where at an earlier stage than it would have been. In other cases, it's bringing mobile service of any kind to these places for the first time, because now we can light up a village or a small town with a small cell, serve the whole community in one step, where there just wouldn't have been a return on building a conventional cell tower. So, you know, different strokes, as it were, around the world, but something in it for everybody.
Where do you go from here?
Well, I've been, you know, supporting operators, regulators, enterprises in parallel to my small cell forum activities over time. I'm looking forward to supporting people in really turning, you know, the concepts that have been developed in the forum into the reality of individual deployments, and helping to learn from that kind of international experience of those kinds of things and put it in practice. And to help people get the balance between small cells and all of the other capacity and user experience enhancing solutions in the, so, you know, small cells are in the shape of the network, the topology, but then there's the spectrum, and making sure that the right spectrum is in place in the right quantities and the right places to serve this, and figuring out the technology roadmap of, you know, upgrading 3G, moving on to 4G, moving on to LTE advanced. And you know, what I'd like to do is help people understand this isn't either or. This isn't shall we have more spectrum or shall we have some more small cells to meet the demands. It's really, you can do well by using both, putting them together. So translating those concepts into the reality in some of the world's busiest places. So London's been a fun environment this last summer, and I was very much deeply involved in making sure that some key high-capacity locations like Wembley Stadium, the biggest stadium in the sports stadium in the UK, was running well over this really busy sporting period. And that went really well, and small cells were a part of that in various forms. So I'm really looking forward to doing more and actually seeing the reality of the outcomes of some of the hard work that's gone in the forum with all the great people I've worked with on this over the last few years.
There is no question that all the sporting events, Olympics there in the UK over the summer was a tremendous success for the carriers. The infrastructure was very well implemented, and the evenness of the traffic flow was managed extremely well. And you know, I remember being in London, you know, many years ago when Michael Jackson had passed away. Every network had gone down. That was it. There were so many, you know, Facebook and Twitter and CNN, all of them just shut right down because the network capacity wasn't there. And you know, I think there was a lot of concern that during the Olympics that the level of data flow over wireless and other mobile technologies was going to be so great to communicate internationally that they were afraid. They did a fantastic job. Is that sentiment going to be echoed in other geographies for Olympics and FIFAs and these other sporting events? Because it's not like the over-the-top players are going away.
No, exactly. Well, I mean, there was a lot of trepidation going into London this summer. This was, after all, the first Olympics of the smartphone era. You know, while mobile was getting going in Beijing 4 years previously, you know, there was nothing like the level of demand and opportunity. It was this time around. So a lot of people spent a lot of time thinking really hard about how mobiles might be used at the Olympics, and put a lot of effort into making sure that they'd really thought about how high the demand could go, where people were going to be in the process of doing that, and quite frankly, putting in some margin, putting in some sensible over-dimensioning for such a critical event, which made really good sense. And there were lots of learnings from that. I mean, you know, people were looking for the story to be, oh dear, something's fallen over. But I actually think just as great a story is, look how smoothly it ran. You know, this is fantastic. And it means that that mobile can be a huge part of the experience of a sporting event like that or any other public event. People were using social media, they were uploading as well as downloading large amounts of video content in these places, and the networks coped well. I will say behind the scenes there were some surprises. There were particular places that had concentrations of people that weren't expecting. The networks coped with that, but actually, you know, it told us some interesting things about human behaviour in that environment. The challenge looking forwards is, you know, we're looking forward to Rio in another 4 years' time, and how we translate, you know, from what was, after all, only a 3G environment in the UK at this point in time into what will be a 4G environment for the next Olympics. So there is another step to think about there. And also the other point being, in a certain way, the Olympics this year in London was a money no object story. You know, this was, let's build the best network. And it's how do we translate those learnings into, you know, what do we do not only at the Olympics but at more routine sporting events, and do that cost effectively, bring those learnings into those smaller but still very important locations in a way that says, you know, the density of demand in Wembley Stadium of, let's say, 1 million people per square kilometre, which is about as dense as it gets. However, in terms of the usage profile, that will be the usage in just a busy part of a city in a year's time. So, you know, how can we bring those learnings forward and do it cost effectively and scalably? And, you know, and a mix of technologies, of offload, of small cells, of new spectrum are really going to be needed in there. The challenge is how much of each and how do you deploy? But, you know, we've got a great data point from where I live this summer, and I really hope to take some of that learning out to a wider territory around the world.
Why is it important to be at conferences like the Small Cell Global Congress?
Well, you learn just so much. You get to spread your thoughts and to absorb thoughts from other people. You get an amazing amount of sharing, where people, you know, in a normal course of events would just be quite quiet about some of the things they're doing. They're encouraged in this environment to go a little step further and say a bit more, to respond to events. And a lot of it's about really spreading best practice. You know, it's a hard road. There's lots to learn along the way. You know, and operators will want to guard that information jealously at one level, because that's if they're of benefit to them. But I also have a great sort of sense of, you know, mature thinking from operators and vendors at these environments that actually know there's a bigger picture here, that if we share some of the pitfalls that we saw along the way, that will grow the market for everybody else. So I've really enjoyed the last couple of days sharing thoughts in that area. I've got a really clear sense that small cells, you know, are here to stay, as if I doubted it beforehand, but that it's really becoming assimilated into an operator's way of thinking about their networks. And a huge number of technology companies, you know, you'd think I'd heard of all the technology companies in small cells after these few years working in this field, but no, there's always new ones popping up with another angle on this market. What it's also teaching us is this isn't going to be a big bang. This is something that's happening now, and there's huge growth to come. But it's going to be something that builds and builds over time, and you know, an extended period of time. So, you know, I'm glad I'm not one of the analysts that's actually putting specific numbers to how many small cells in any given year. We know it's going to be big and growing, but you know, the difference between solving some localized capacity hotspots and driving a wide-scale rollout to improve user experience everywhere could easily be a factor of 10 in the number of small cells needed. So, you know, there's a wide range of opportunity, you know, at all levels, and this is exactly the sort of environment you get to fine-tune the crystal ball gazing and help with that future.
Simon, always a pleasure to speak with you. You're an industry leader. There's not too many people who know this ecosystem as well as you. I have no doubt that you will continue to grace us with your presence and the industry as well, to continue to grace the industry with your thoughts and leadership.
It's been a delight talking to you as always, Tony. I hope to do it again in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Mr. Simon Saunders here at the Small Cell Global Congress in Berlin. I am Tony Sklar with bnetTV.